This is the 5th day of the March-April 86 retreat. Someone brought up in a meeting the case of the geese. I don't think I've said in this retreat that when something is brought up in a talk that has been discussed and looked at in a meeting, I'm not capable of repeating verbatim what was said. And sometimes the question may be slightly changed to make it more discussable here. So please don't feel misunderstood or misquoted. By the time it gets here, or maybe even as we discuss it, looking at something that starts out so personal always goes beyond the personal. I think for all of us there can be enormous relief and release and maybe some freedom in getting away from seeing our problems as so personal and looking what is universal in them. Universal meaning not different for other human beings, maybe slightly differently shaded in content and amount, intensity or so, but fundamentally human beings share the same problems, feeling of isolation, selfhood, fear that goes with it, anxiety that comes with it, the yearning for being free from lack, being whole, being happy, being loved. All of that is not unique in oneself. We tend to think that way when we get locked into our problems, and that makes them that much more difficult to look at or shed, understand. With the geese, you will remember, or will recall the story of two people walking across a field and a flock of geese overhead, and the question, what are these? What is that there? And the immediate answer, these are geese. And then the question, where are they now? And the answer, they have flown away. And we were looking at this thing together, that if there is awareness, attention, and the computer, which is the brain, not feeling called upon to name, to explain, to describe, but quiet in the listening, then there is no geese, there's only the whack, 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 whack. And the awareness is another thought. Of course you could say, wait a minute, you look up there and there are no geese. But if you don't remember the geese or don't think in terms of the geese that were, then it's not that geese have flown away, it's just whatever there is now. And is one immediately called upon to name it, or is it just there? Constantly new. If the memory doesn't stamp it, old. The person brought up, what about geese? They do come from the north and fly to the south. And I myself, I think during the talk, I don't know in what connection, don't remember it now. Oh, recalling the geese flying overhead in a little house on the coast, saying they hadn't flown away yet. They hadn't left yet. Because later on during that vacation, there were no more geese flying over the house. And we concluded from our knowledge about geese that they had flown away, that they'd gone south, and we're even quite interested, where would they have flown? And when having an immediate experience with geese, immediate really with this windstorm over the roof, one becomes sort of involved and wants to find out more about it. And this is what is what we were talking about in the meeting, and the person was wondering, is there anything wrong with it? Knowing the way of geese. And of course there's nothing wrong with it. I'm not implying that the person thought there was something wrong with it. But can one see what it involves? It involves memory, knowledge, and thinking in those terms. And if the knowledge that is memorized is not sufficient, one has to go to places like books where knowledge is memorized in the printed page, film strips. As the person brought up during the meeting, there can immediately be an addiction to that, almost wanting to know more and more and more about everything. Not being able to see anything without needing to know its history, its zoological or botanical whatever, evolution, species names, so forth. It doesn't need to be an addiction, but it can become one. And why? One has to ask oneself. Is it that one is really interested in this, or is this also a way of becoming somebody, becoming knowledgeable? It is such a rewarded thing in our society, Western, particularly the Western cultures, where the knowledgeable person who has a lot of information available without having to run to the encyclopedia is admired, is looked up to, gets high-paying jobs, gets good notes from grade 1, good marks in school, which brings reward from parents, from teachers, may bring some admiration and a lot of envy from one's co-students. It's not all a blessing. One is greatly envied too, and sometimes isolated. Feels isolated, particularly if there is pride in this, and one has learned this pride. One doesn't even know why one has it, and finds oneself maybe shunned by other kids at school. So even as one listens to the geese and the information pours out of the memory bank, these are geese, they are now coming back from I don't know where, but somebody else may know it, and talking about it, can one be aware that as this process starts its momentum, sometimes avalanching, there is no more hearing of the geese. Something else is taking the foreground in the mind. Not just the foreground, maybe the whole mind. And there's just a slight background noise left which is not attended to. The information becomes the important thing. Or, as one walks together, again this phenomenon of who is more knowledgeable than the other. It doesn't have to be this way, but it can be this way, and can one watch it. Not say it's so or it isn't so, but it is all open to inspection, open to this inner ear and eye to detect. Actually, one could say, well, the moment you name a tree, then there's image and you don't see the tree. That's not necessarily so at all. If the image, the knowledge, the name of the tree does not become the important thing, then one can see the tree. And very often, if one does not have any knowledge about trees, has never studied trees or gone through the forest with someone who is knowledgeable, one still has an image of tree. It doesn't mean one has no image of a tree. Only that image looks more like what a child does when it paints a tree. A stem with something round if it's deciduous on top, or something sort of like this if it's evergreen. And because that image is there, one doesn't see the thing either. Same with birds. One has never gone into, maybe with somebody who is very knowledgeable about birds and can point out this bird and that and its characteristic. All of a sudden, one may see something. Before it was all sparrows. Just as one can be a tremendous bore in walking together, naming everything, knowing everything, one can be just as much of a bore in saying, no names, no images. I want to see this thing. Somebody asked how do I really know whether I'm attending, whether there is attention or whether there's just thought about what is going on. Apparently this person had been in a discussion with other people and somebody had said, no, in attention there is no thought. When there's attention, there's no thought. One can talk an hour about this, but whether there is actually attention or just thinking about what is going on can only be found out or seen by oneself. When there is attention, it's clear that it is not thinking about something, that something is seen or heard directly, and that if thought comes in, it is seen as thought. If one is talking about something, that's what we're doing all the time, right now, or in meetings. looking at something, using words, and yet out of a state of attention, of looking, not of knowing, but of examining. And then using language, which definitely is word and thought, comes from memory. Without memory, we couldn't speak English, German, whatever. But the realm, the field in which it happens is one of awareness. Awareness also of the limitation of the words. We've talked about it several times, and it's so valuable. It's so valuable when one meets together or has conversation meetings. I don't mean just these meetings here, but staff meetings or whatever meetings one attends, has to attend, to be aware of the limitation and power of the word. Power on oneself and power on others. We are alike in this respect. And therefore flexible, ready to qualify a word. Make sure that both of us or all of us give the same meaning to the word. Or else we can discuss day and night. Haggle, fight, argue. And one of the reasons is that we don't have the same associations and meanings for the word that is being used. This leads to another question that came up, or another question, somebody reporting that part of the talk which dealt with comparing concentration, the practice of concentration with awareness, brought a tremendous relief and release to a person who had practiced for many, many years, putting effort into having the attention rest in the palm of the hand, which is what one is trained to do in certain Zen centers. I remember going through it myself and the inability to do it, not knowing how to do it, trying, and it appeared at the time like what I call the elevator effect. For a moment one is down, and then one thinks, am I down there? And then one is up. And then one thinks, I have to go down, and then one is still up, because one thinks I have to be down. And then when one is down for a moment and has in fact found this technique to work, for a little while it works unawares, and then, am I still down? Oh, how good that I'm down. And with that, one is up again. But the elevator effect after a while can let up. But as this person discovered after years and years and years of practice, was that there had constantly been a strain, an effort, very likely sustained with willpower, to keep the attention in the palm of the left hand and nowhere else. Which in itself is a tremendous use and drain of energy to force this to happen, because the attention wants to wander. Naturally, we want to hear what's going on all over. Where we were in February visiting with our children, they had a dog. It was still a puppy, but it was a huge puppy already. But I wanted to sit on a lap. Until it finally got up on Kyle's lap. He was the only available lap. Nobody else wanted this huge puppy on his lap. Until then he was almost impossible to bear. And we were already told this. Pardon us for this dog. He's so hyper. He's just chasing around, turning on his back, showing his belly to be friendly and sniffing. It was just impossible almost to have the dog until finally he landed on Kyle's lap. And immediately he was quiet. He was no longer a hyper dog. He was just at ease, relaxed. But the ears, they were just going around like antenna or like lighthouses. Always, if something was said or a noise, there were the ears. It was beautiful to watch. Highly sensitive, trying to take everything in. And I think this is how our human senses are too. The senses are there to protect us. And there is a resistance, a natural resistance to force the attention to be in a certain place. And because there is this resistance, there has to be willpower. If there was no resistance to it, then there wouldn't have to be any effort, would there? To just listen, feel this mellow breeze on the face, neck, and hands, the sound of the paper there. Is there any effort in that? Does one have to make oneself do this? There would be effort if one had been trained that the attention should be focused on a single word or area of the body, and that training had taken hold. The mind has been conditioned through reward and punishment to do this. Then to listen to whatever's going on may be an effort, because there's a resistance now to doing that. Because somehow or other one may not understand the whole mechanism, but somehow or other now it's right to be focused. And the other is resisted as being dangerous, wrong, false, not leading to what one wants or leading astray. The other condition, of course, is that one is indulging, enjoying daydreams, either a pleasant kind, or one may be entangled in a fearful, angry replay or fantasy. At that moment there is no attention. You may not even hear the bird. One is in the movies. Love movies, horror movies, historical movies. We've got an infinite video shelf. Tapes. And then there may be the idea I should I should pay attention. I shouldn't be thinking, I should pay attention. Is there a resistance involved in this to pay attention? Then paying attention becomes an effort, and this is not attention. This is then again effort to do something connected with motive and willpower. The other idea that was mentioned, which may be in many people's minds, is when it is heard that attention is not focalized, one-pointed, what one may have been trained to do with concentration, but that it is open, free. Then there can come the idea I should be able to hear everything. There's already an idea, and already there's an image, I should hear everything. And then of course realizing that then one hasn't heard this or that, then the feeling I'm not doing right, somebody else may be doing this and be better than me, all of this comes in. We can maybe later talk about comparison. Can one drop all ideas of what attention is and just attend? Is it possible? Right now, someone is talking and one is listening to what is being said. Maybe one is daydreaming. But if one is listening and trying to see at the same time what these words really refer to, there is a certain focalization going on, isn't there? If we're talking in a meeting where there is certainly intense listening to what the person has to say and looking at what does it mean and asking and so forth. And if we were, this has been maybe mentioned before, if we were sitting in a restaurant, for instance, having this conversation, and there was a table left and a table right, one in front and one in back, we wouldn't hear what everybody else is saying. So attention does not mean one hears everything. That's idea and can be dropped immediately. And yet even if there is a focalizing on something as one is talking together or as one is looking at something for oneself, can it happen out of an openness, an unboundedness by anything, or not or. In other words, the mind is intensely listening to something that is being said and looking, and yet the flapping of the paper or the wind in the trees is also heard. It's not excluded. There's no attempt to raise walls or barriers. One doesn't think of things as distractions. It may be too loud to hear the voice, and then one might close a window, or because that interferes actually with the process of listening to each other. Yet if the mind is not bound by a motive to be concentrated, it will immediately respond if something else comes up that has nothing to do with the conversation. It is still open, and yet attends. I can say concentrates on what is being said. Sometimes or often people say, when we're doing something like this together in a talk, then I can really be with it. But when I sit, then there's nothing there, nothing is coming up. It's sort of gone away, whatever seemed to be crucial to attend to during the talk. And then what should I do? Should I dredge this back up? Why should one do anything? Can one just sit and allow whatever wants to come up, and if nothing comes up, just sit with nothing. It seems to be so hard to do because we are so accustomed to constantly being bombarded by stimulation of some kind or another that we begin to crave it and seek it when it's not there. As a vague feeling, if one has never looked at it, it's vague. If one starts to look at it, it becomes clear. A vague or clear feeling. One lacks something. One needs something. This thing is scary. One has never been without stimulation since maybe day one. It's amazing to see, and one has done it oneself with a little baby. One already thinks one has to amuse this baby, tickle it and throw it up in the air. And goo, goo, goo. It's so much imposition upon this little new organism, which is so sufficient unto itself in looking or needing to go to sleep. And there's a time for talking to the new baby, but then it needs sensitivity. Usually we feel we have to do immediately entertainment for the baby. And touching it or cuddling it, that's not entertainment. One can feel what is needed and what feels good. But leaving that aside, here we are, accustomed, habituated, addicted to constant stimulation of the senses, inner and outer. This is why a retreat can be a real exploration into something that is not usual, not everyday like, namely the absence of a lot of stimulation that one may or may not be addicted to in one's everyday life, and then to find out about this feeling of lack, this feeling of emptiness or boredom. Without doing anything about it, not labeling it, not explaining it. Here an explanation has been given, but the explanation that has been given is not the state itself. Is that clear? It's very important to understand this, that a description, a name, or an explanation for something is not the thing itself. That's the difference between thinking and seeing, or experiencing immediately without mediation of any words. And if there's a habitual withdrawal from this state or wanting to fill it, can one notice all of that and abstain from these habits and just let this state that feels so whichever empty, shallow, nothing, boring, let it do its own thing. Just aware, that's all. But we started out saying that one feels here where something is being looked at, one can look at it, but in sitting this may not come up. But things do come up. We all know that. Maybe a dull, vague feeling of anxiety, or all of a sudden a past experience in which one was incredibly angry comes up in the mind. It is replayed so realistically that one may get a sore throat from past yelling without yelling. How does one look at a thing, or does it just play and one is totally involved in it? There's a difference. If one is totally involved in it, then the thing is just like electricity caught in a loop from which it cannot escape. It goes round and round and round. Nothing is understood or learned. It's just a constant replay with some variations that one thinks maybe I should have done differently, but it's not taking a step back from the whole thing. But this means one has to already be aware that this is going on, that the loop is running. And then the looking at it is the same as when we talk here together. Not just running in the same track about it, but looking deeper, beyond the personal that was involved, to see what was really happening on a very universal, general level. Why is there anger? Why is there no dropping it? Just to see how the replay of it gives some satisfaction, and yet at the same time leaves one dissatisfied because it's not real. To see how incomplete one's memories, one usually only remembers one's own side, and that not correctly either, because one can only remember it as correctly as one saw it at the time, which in anger our senses are so narrow, our understanding is so limited, the intellect is not even intelligent. And where the other person came from was not recorded at all, because there was no understanding of it. There was no trying to find out about it. So, if the scene comes up, and unfinished business does come up because the brain labors to finish business, but has usually no way of doing it other than going over and over it again, and so it'll drop in one's lap again. How is one to finish it so that the brain can be done with it? Is it possible? I've already said it can't happen if one just goes over and over the same loop. That's not finishing it. It's just entrenching it, strengthening the memory, and the anger is still aroused. Is it possible to have insight into the whole thing? not the particular scene, well, maybe I should have been not like this, or if she had been differently. This is not insight into the whole thing. Meaning a quietness, a non-knowing. Seeing that this feeling of self, me, my rights, my happiness, my injuries and hurts and insults is at the root of all of that. Not just here, but with every human being. Can that be seen totally? Not as a guilt or a wrongdoing, but as a fact. That the thought of me, my image, my pride, my rights, prerogatives, my ways, my pleasure, my pain, my suffering, my fate, this total identification with this image of oneself, which is historical, it's fat with past experiences, all recorded as memories. That this is at the root of all conflict, anger, jealousy, envy. Suffering. I don't mean having pain. Having pain is not suffering. If we use the word in terms of how we feel mentally, how bad we feel mentally that we have to suffer. Having pain is a clean affair, maybe very disagreeable. But if there's not the thought, why do I have to suffer that, then that suffering disappears. And there's a direct being with what's there factually, without becoming a victim, which is another very favorite image that we have for ourselves. See, this kind of insight into self-image and all that flows from it and all that comes back to it, that is not just thinking about it. Insight is not thinking. If one thinks about it, it continues. You could say, now wait a minute, I've had an insight into the image and it disappeared, and a little bit later there was a new image. See it and let it drop. Or is one this time going to hold on to it because it felt so good, feels so good, so safe? It can be seen at any moment. Why don't we? Why isn't it happening? Is there this tremendous attachment to it? And the belief and the security of it? This image that will continue. We will talk about this tomorrow, and talking about the fear of dying. All wrapped up with attachment to image of me and my loved ones, or my loved things or loved ideas. If the image isn't seen, our misery continues, and our pleasures. Because a lot of pleasures are connected with a self-image, the pleasure of pride, or being somebody, having achieved, attained, being looked up to by others, is all the pleasure of the image. Our remembrance of past pleasurable experiences has also become image to which one hangs on and then wants to be assured that this will last in the future, continue in the future. It's all like these geese. What is it? Where has it gone? In listening openly, at the risk of not knowing right now who one is or what one will be, the risk of the insecurity, the dreaded insecurity, is not really insecure at all. When one is, I think one can understand that logically, when one is nothing, what does one have to lose? What does one have to defend? What could possibly get hurt or insulted or taken away from one if one is identified with a territory, which is all an extension of the self-image? My territory, whether it's at the workplace or the country. If all of that collapses because it's seen for what it is, mental structure, and at the same time the cause of all of our sorrow, suffering, and fleeting pleasures, and why keep building it up time and time again? And I want to, before we end, differentiate between the joy of hearing the geese or seeing flowers in bloom, ice on the river or the gushing of the cascades, the joy of being outside or being with people where there's a real, genuine understanding and relationship. That joy is there when it's there, and when it's not there, it's not there. Why make a memory out of it? And then wonder whether one will ever have it again. Already fearful or sad or melancholic, it may probably never happen again. Then it becomes remembered pleasure and fought for or feared for pleasure. So, can one ask oneself why one clings to this mental structure of me? And watch it, how it operates in one's daily life. Not take anybody's word for it. It doesn't work that way. It has to be observed and seen in action. Discovered at the time of hurt, anger, jealousy. Unearthed, brought to light, looked at. Without any motive to get rid of it or to do anything about it. The revelation, the seeing, takes care of itself. end here for today.